Okay, so this is, I believe, the 7th video lecture for the chapter on gender and sexuality, sexuality and gender and psychology. In the previous video lecture, wrapped up somewhere talking about the bonobos and evolutionary psychology and what the current research is on attraction, or what women seem to be seeking and what men seem to be seeking. Okay, so this lecture, I want to talk a little bit about the concept of orientation, and I hinted at this in a previous lecture, what is meant by orientation. And if you think about it, so if you think about orient, as you orientate yourself to a place, it refers to your direction. And so that's what we mean by the direction of one's sexual attraction, or the direction of one's sexual activity. And again, the same way when we were talking about gender, there's the way we think about ourselves, and then there's the way we express. So you have your gender identity and your gender expression. The same thing holds for orientation, that you may have a sexual orientation, like this is how I identify myself, but it doesn't necessarily have to translate into actually what you do. My guess is you're familiar with these already. Hetero meaning different, right? So straight people. Homo meaning the same. Bisexual, I'm not even sure if we use that term anymore, meaning that you find both males and females. Lesbian referring to a homosexual female. Gay referring to a homosexual man. Asexual referring to people that really are not attracted to anybody. And pansexual referring to people that are attracted to trans people, straight people, whatever, all kinds of things. There is a discussion in your textbook about the origins of orientation. So the question about, because again, in the psychology class, we want to talk about, are there biological explanations for if people are heterosexual, if they're straight, or if they're gay or homosexual? There is a little bit of evidence that suggests that our orientation is a biological process. It is biologically determined. I forget. So there's also some debate about how many people exactly are not straight. And the sociologist in me would say, well, I'm not sure why that's even a relevant question. Why? Because if we say that it's biological, like why does it matter how many people? I guess maybe the question is how normal, or anyway. But there is some evidence that there are some genetic variations. Homosexuality seems to run in families. It seems to run in families, particularly along the mother's line, which is consistent with other kinds of genetic variation as well. Again, that may go back to the fact she has a larger X, so she can carry more information. So in other words, it gets passed on on her side of the family. There seems to be. There is some evidence that suggests that a woman who has more male children, so if she has 5 boys, the 6th boy is more likely to be homosexual than the first boy. And that is explained by the role of testosterone on influencing the brain structures. So the idea is that direction of our orientation is decided in the brain. And we have structures in our brain that tell us we're attracted to boys or tell us we're attracted to girls. And it is testosterone, remember, because we all begin the same. We're all on the path to being female unless we're exposed to testosterone. So the notion that the brain structure that directs our orientation, our sexual attraction, has to masculinize, has to be changed by testosterone. So the theory goes is that the more babies, the more boys that a mother has, the less testosterone, or the less responsive her offspring are to what's called a testosterone flush. And one way you might conceptualize this is that, and this is also true, that there are more male babies are born with other birth defects, that when she is reproducing herself, it requires less, there's less it's easier, I guess, for lack of a better word, but when she is creating a different version of humanity, like a boy version instead of a girl version, there's more potential. That's just different theories, but there is some evidence that this happens in the womb. And then again, there's some evidence that there are brain structures. The Dutch, Scandinavian researchers have done a lot of research on brain structures, and there's some evidence that there's like a nucleus, a little small cluster. And the research that I'm familiar with is about transsexuals, and that people who transition from male, so they're born male and they transition to female, in fact have like a female structure in their brain, and people that transition from a male to a the other way around. But the idea that what you transition, like your brain, you're trying to sync your body up with what's already in your brain. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. This is a slide, just offering some statistics about, who does what. The thing about getting any good sexual research is people are very reluctant to tell the truth. This drugs and sex are the two number one lies that people make to their doctor. And it's the number one, this is on another slide, it is the most common lie that college age people tell their sexual partners. We do not tell our partners the true number. You may have heard of the principle of threes, which says that boys are likely to multiply their number of partners by three, and girls will divide their numbers of partners by three. So a boy might say, I've had 9 partners when they've had 3. And a girl might say they've had 1 partner when they've also had 3. So it speaks to that double standard. It also speaks to why we should talk about it more, right? Because if we're more comfortable, if we're more transparent, if we talk about what we like, what we don't like, how to use safe sex, all of those kinds of things. So that's really what these slides are. What people do, and I'll just let you read it. You might be surprised to know that people are a little bit more promiscuous. Um, I don't know. I was going to say than you think they are, but I don't know what you think they are. So, yeah. It's also, I think, really important to point out that the human sexual response, our bodies are capable of being aroused by a whole lot more things than society tells us. Society puts limits, or society restricts what is considered acceptable sexual behavior, but our body responds sexually to a whole lot more things than our culture tells us is quote unquote appropriate. And okay, um, here's a little bit about sexually transmitted infections. I don't think it would be good form of me to not at least talk about some of this stuff. There's, what's to say, about half of all, when I was a kid, they were called diseases, and once they were called venereal diseases, but now they're referred to as infections. So the odds are pretty high that you're going to get one at some point in your life. There's parasitic, there's viral, and there's bacterial ones. So gonorrhea and syphilis and chlamydia, these are bacteria that you can pass on. It's much, much easier for girls often to get a diagnosis, right? Because of the vaginal secretions, it may have a different odor, it may have a different texture, it may have a different color. But for instance, chlamydia, I think this is true for, might be true for gonorrhea too. In order to take a sample for men, they actually have to stick a Q-tip up the head of the glands, up the head of the penis. And I don't have a penis, but that sounds like that would hurt. And it's much easier to get a swab. It's also, again, I want to say this again, it's much more likely that a girl will get a sexually transmitted infection from a boy, right? Despite the stereotypes that girls give it to boys. I mean, ultimately, yeah, somebody's got to give it to somebody, but the odds of her getting it from a man on like one encounter is much greater than a guy getting it from her. And that just has to do with the way our bodies are built. Of course, you've got vaginal lice. You've got a couple of venereal disease. You got a couple of viral diseases like herpes and HIV that you never get rid of. And then, I just noticed one is not on here, which is HPV. And HPV is also a viral infection. There are some that, you get some that you do, what do they call it? it's not pass it, but it does eventually go away. But certainly herpes and HIV do not. These stick with you. Herpes will result, you have two kinds. You have what's called simplex 1 and simplex 2. So cold sores, the blisters on your mouth, that is simplex, shoot, I should know that. I think that's simplex 2. And then you often, herpes, the other one, is the one that you get in your genital area, and it is the same. It is open sores and blisters. Let's see, 35% show up between people ages 13 to 29. Abstain, be faithful, use a condom. The ABCs of sex. I'm going to stop and we'll talk a little bit about this one, and then I want to do a public service announcement on the topic of consent.